Hey, I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast.
I'm just recognizing, I'm trying to become more intentional with my, I don't know if mental health is the right word, but just like how I feel, what impacts when I'm feeling like just great about the world. And I'm like, I love life. I feel full of energy. I feel inspired. I just feel good and life is good. And when do I feel icky? And we went on a family cruise recently, and I don't know. That made me think a lot too about it wasn't the cruise. Like the cruise was not like I'm on top of the world. This is my best life. This is I wasn't feeling it was fun, but that was not my peak mental health. It's been while I've been out in the yard pulling weeds that I've been staring at for 3 years since we moved in, thinking, oh my gosh, my yard is such a mess. I wish it wasn't a mess. I'm a failure. I really should be I really was internalizing it, and I probably need to work on that too, where I'm not making it feel like a value judgment on myself. But it was something that is important to me, to have a yard that I enjoy being in, and I like being outside. And I was avoiding going outside in my own home because of that stress and guilt and shame for not doing this thing. And so being out there and pulling the weeds and just being I'm just going to figure it out, and I'm going to try this thing. Oh yeah, that worked. I'm going to keep going, and just allowing myself to just get this momentum. And I'm out there every day. I wish I could be out there more than I am, but I'm already out there 3 or 4 hours a day. And I love it. I love being out there. I love hearing the birds. My kids are playing around me. And I feel this satisfaction of I'm doing it. I'm doing the thing that I put off for so long. And so I think that I've been noticing that in other aspects of my life too, of the space that creates and frees up to do things that I want to be doing or feel like I should be doing, instead of putting it off because that sounds hard. And it's harder. It's harder to live with that feeling of I should be doing that thing and I'm not doing it. So anyway, that was kind of an aha thing I've been recognizing in the past few months, kind of starting with the cruise mentality of this is interesting. This is not it. This is not my happiest time. It's actually doing the things that I value, I guess. And maybe for some people it is at a cruise. I know a lot of people really love to travel. But I'm just recognizing for me, I love that feeling of getting it done.
Yeah. I wonder, maybe we could talk a little bit about why we avoid things like that, even tasks that are not very difficult, that we just keep putting off and putting off and putting off. And it's true that a task that maybe has, there's no way to measure it really, but let's say it has a one value, but the amount of energy that we put towards avoiding it or shaming ourselves or whatever makes it have a 10 value in our minds. And usually when we do it, we're oh my gosh, I didn't even realize the 9 that I was carrying that wasn't even really part of the task.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's very true. And I think as soon as it's the task gets stale and stagnant, almost if you think about water, if it's still for too long, it just gets really gross and it can cause issues and stuff. But if it's flowing, then everything feels healthy and it feels good. And so even the smallest tasks that really are not that big of a deal, like a phone call I need to make, or I really just need to put this thing on the calendar, or even texts on my phone. I'll have these texts, all these unread messages of oh yeah, I need to go reply to that. So it doesn't even take very long. It could take 10 minutes or less than that. But as soon as it just stays on my list, it becomes scarier and bigger and it's more stressful. And then I actually go do the thing and I'm why did I let that sit on my mind? Because it affects me all the time, right? It doesn't just cause stress when I remember it. I think it just sits at the back of my mind and causes anxiety and stress. And so checking those things off is just such a high. It's such a high.
How do you think that type of thing translates to parents who have children who are medically complex or need special attention, or that are outside the quote unquote bounds of what normal parenting is? How are some of those tasks or those to-dos different for a parent in our demographic than in other contexts?
I think it's regular parenting on steroids, right? So I think that you have this in parenting where you're there's no end to the list of things I could be doing that would, at least in our heads, make me a better parent, or, improve life for my child, or, I don't know. There's no end to the things that we could be doing, which I think is true in all parenting. But I think once you add disabilities and medical complexities into the mix, that is just amplified so much, because you have a child who, you have therapists and doctors and your family members who are like, your child is here and they're supposed to be up here, like supposed to, quote unquote. And so, whether that's, a million different things with evaluations and stuff, you're constantly reminded of that gap. And so I think there's this feeling of like, if I just did more therapy, or if we just tried this other therapy we haven't done yet, or if we just got this new equipment that might help, a stander or a walker, or like, fill in the blank, or if we were more consistent with these meds that we're supposed to be getting, like, there's just like, there are so many more ways there are so many more ways for us to feel like we could be doing more and we should be doing more in the medical world and disability world. And so I think with all things, it's important to recognize if it's something you want on your list. So with the yard example, that is something that I recognize with myself. I love to be outside. I love to be with my family. This is a no-brainer. I want my yard to be somewhere I love to be and to not cause me stress. And I want it to be beautiful. And so I think that because that's important to me and I kept it on my list, then that was something that was causing stress when I wasn't doing it. And so I think when you're looking at other things, you need to recognize, do I want this on my list? Like, if I feel like I should be doing this thing and I'm not, and I'm stressed about it, right? So if we use like a therapy example, if it's, say, a therapist is telling you should be doing these exercises with your child 3 times a day, every day, and they keep checking in on you and you keep not doing it and it's causing the stress. Ask me how I know. I've been there. And I think like there's so much freedom when you can look at it and be like, actually, I don't really value the skill or maybe I do value the skill, but like I don't value it enough to add it to my mental load. And so I'm actually just going to intentionally be like, you know what? There's a reason that we're consistently not doing this thing. Our plate is just too full. This cannot be a priority. And so we are intentionally removing and maybe you don't even say it to the therapist because you don't want confrontation, which I think is totally fine. You don't have to tell the therapist, but you could be like, you know what? Like, I just don't have a ton of buy-in on this and my life is really crazy and we need to just do the therapy while you're here. And I just can't do the things in between. I'm not going to try. And, I think that can free up so much of that space. So I think you can free up that space either by doing the thing, right? Like going out and pulling the weeds, or by being like, you know what? I'm fine with an overgrown yard, or I'm fine with my child not trying these therapies. Like, our mental health and our quality of life is not dependent on that. In fact, if I release that expectation of myself, then I'm not going to have that weighing on me. So I think that it like applies to all of life, but I think with so much intensity with disability parenting, because again, so much more is asked of you.
There's like a lot more at stake. And I've seen over and over again, mothers in particular who will never put things for themselves on that list, and they would never dream of prioritizing something for themselves over something for their child. And so the point that you made about really looking at, what are the things that I consistently am not doing and just feeling terrible about, and can I either acknowledge that, like, oh yeah, this isn't something that I need to prioritize, that it was a priority that was given to me by somebody else and it doesn't actually fit into our lives very well. But what about, like, how do you manage the feelings that come with that? Because we kind of already touched on the mental weight of the things that are left undone, but how about the guilt and shame that many people experience when they decide to not do something that they know would be good?
Yeah, that's tricky. I think that's really hard. I think for me, it's like hard to put my finger on, but I think literally just being like, I don't have to do this thing. And is this something like, what are the reasons I'm not doing it? And is it because it's actually not as important as some people are thinking? And so I think with that, you have to have really honest look at what quality of life looks like for you and what it looks like for your child, what it looks like for your family. And then being like, does that mean that my child has to walk eventually, right? If it's like you need to do these exercises and it might increase the chances that they may walk someday, and you don't know that they're going to walk someday, but you know, that's important to you. And it usually starts out really important to you. But I think a lot of parents will come to the point where they're like, I don't know, do they have to walk? Like, they seem super happy as they are. Are they, like, realistically, will this happen? I don't know. I think if you feel like you're chasing something that the you know, off chance that it might work, I think that can feel like, I don't know, I don't know. Like, is it really worth all of the mental and physical things that it adds to your life? And, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing like disability and medical complexity and, you know, terminal diagnoses and things like that to really help you put your life in perspective of like, what really matters? Like, is it that we're doggedly doing all these exercises on the off chance that they'll walk someday? Or is it having more time and space to like snuggle this child and like really enjoy them instead of like just pushing and pushing and pushing yourself and them? Is that really the point of life? Like, I err more on the spectrum of like, you know what, the snuggles and the like mental stability matters more to me. And I know that's for some people it is like, no, I actually get a lot of life from pushing and pushing and doing all the exercises and like, we'll never give up. And I think that's fair too. So I think really recognizing what feels authentic to you, and for your family and for your child. I think those are three separate categories, like to you, to your child, to your family as a whole, because if you have other children and a partner, like, you know, these things impact everyone. So I think looking at all of those things really honestly and doing some soul searching could help you get to that point. But, you know, it can be a process too.
There's a big sense of relief in that question of who said that it had to be like this. And the most clear example I can think of is when I would do IEP meetings for Annie, and, you know, the educators would have these goals for her. And then I was finally like, these actually aren't goals that I actually care about very much. So we're going to adjust those based on what I know I can do as a parent in the way that I support her education, but also what I think is practical for her. Because, you know, she had a neurodegenerative disease. And so over time, she was going to lose skills. Like, that just was part of the package deal. And so we had these IEP meetings that were all about progress and goals. That's how the IEP structure is set up, is like these milestones where you're seeing improvement and measuring improvement. And those IEP meetings were so painful because not only did I have the reality of my daughter's decline and loss of skills showing up on these goals that were consistently not being met, but then I also had the weight of this, like, kind of like this guilt of like, maybe if I was doing more as a parent, I could be, you know, like showing that there's progress, even though that's not even consistent with the reality of her disease. And when I really just got to the point where I was like, oh, actually, I get to say, I get to have like a lot more sway and say in this environment than I initially thought I did. That was such a relief. And that informed the way that when my middle daughter got into kindergarten, I did half days for her at a full day kindergarten because I wanted her to spend time with Annie. You know, that was, and I think if I hadn't gone through that with Annie, I wouldn't have known that I was even allowed to do something like that. So it creates this, not only like a flexibility in thinking about how we structure our lives, but finding the places where we have really much more autonomy and choice than it first seems that we do.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that really helps with that kind of thing, it sounds like you did this too, where you can kind of recognize where professionals are coming from. Because I think a lot of times, a lot of that pressure does come from professionals, you know, whether it's the therapists or the educators at the IEP, where you're like, this is their job, is to like push this child to meet these goals. And that's not inherently bad. That's not a bad thing. I think, you know, our kids can be helped a lot with that type of mentality. But I also think as the parent, we can be the person who's like, wait a minute, like, let's take a step back. Like, is this best for Annie? Like, are these things, again, like that you even care about? Is my child going to full day kindergarten? Is that more important than these precious time, this limited time that she has with her older sister? And I think, you know, those kind of tough questions are things that parents are much more equipped to answer. And it kind of feels like our job to be like, wait a minute, like, if you will take and take and take as much as we'll give you as far as, you know, working on these goals with these children. And again, that's not inherently bad, but I think being able to say, you know what, we're going to pause feeding therapy right now because, you know, we're fighting for his life right now. And this is just not top priority. And I'm literally falling apart. Like, I can't maintain this pace. So we have to pause this. We had to do that when my son was about 6 months old, and I got a lot of shame from them. At least I felt it, like a lot of like, okay, like he really needs feeding therapy. I'm like, yeah, because you're the feeding therapist. Like, of course you feel that way. You feel like your specialty is the most important thing because that's your specialty, which is, it's great that you care about it. But I think recognizing like these are professionals who are trained on this thing, and they might take as much as you'll give. And so to be able to recognize where your priorities are and what you value and kind of where you want to draw that line of like, hey, actually, you know, like you said, like where you spoke up in the IEP meeting of like, these aren't my goals. Let's rethink this. Like, this child does not fit in a box, where she's losing skills instead of gaining them as the system's kind of built around, you know, supporting. So
what are some of the key things that you're seeing over and over again with the conversations that you have with folks? Like, what are some of the things that kind of rise to the surface as repeated concerns or repeated, like the same types of stories that you hear from the people that you talk with?
That's a good question. There are probably like 20 different themes that feel like pretty consistent. Like especially when we're doing what we call story episodes, where it's just someone sharing their story from, you know, day one of realizing anything was going on with their child. It might be during pregnancy or after. And in those episodes, I could probably tell you, like, there's probably 5 formulas, but there's always grief, right? There's always this deep sadness and yeah, a lot of disappointment and feelings like that when they find out that their child has medical needs, disabilities. And I think it's really interesting too, because there's almost always embarrassment around that, right? When they're talking about like, how did it feel when you first found out that your child was disabled or that they had this rare disease or that, you know, they had medical issues of any kind? Like, how did that feel? And there's always like this, it was so hard. Like, it felt like my life had been flipped upside down. It wasn't what I expected. There's always the talk about like, this is the type of thing that happens to other people, not me. But then also I don't know, I usually sense, or they say outright, like, I don't feel that you know, I don't feel that way anymore. And I love them, as if it's like, you know, them being upset and sad about this and feeling grief about it is at odds with their love of their child, or that it somehow means that they're not a good parent or they don't accept them exactly as they are. And I think it's just messy. I think you know, you can feel all of those things at the same time, and they're not at odds with each other, right? Like when we love a child profoundly and they are suffering and struggling, of course you're upset about it, right? I think it illustrates that love. And I think it also gets messy too when you're like, yeah, but that's not all I'm upset about. I'm upset that my life is harder than I thought it would be, or that I'm missing out on these experiences that my peers are having with their children that are typically developing. But I also feel like that's just so fair. Of course you feel that way. You know, it's a very understandable thing that I think I hesitate to say 100% of people experience, but I kind of think it probably is close to 100%. I think if there's like a 1% that's like, I wasn't upset or sad, I'm like, or maybe you're in denial. I don't know. I just think, like, in my experience, I've talked to so many parents, like, without any exceptions, there's loss and there's grief in that. And I mean, a lot of the parents I talk to, you know, the children have intense medical needs. It's not just one thing. It's 5 things. It's 10 things. It's a shortened life expectancy. It's a lot of, you know, intense disability and medical complexity. And so I think that plays into it too. But I think accepting that it's a universal experience, almost like, you know, like relatively universal experience to feel deep grief and pain and sorrow and upset about your child having disabilities. I think accepting that and knowing that can help normalize it and help you not feel the shame that can really muck that up and make it way harder to process. If you're like, oh, I feel so upset about my child's disability, And I'm such a horrible parent for feeling that way. I think that's going to be so much harder to work through in a healthy way than if you're just like, I'm so upset about my child's disability and I'm a human and that's why I feel upset about it. And it just is. It's it's just an emotion. It's a feeling, and it doesn't mean anything bad about me. It doesn't mean anything bad about my child, but it just is. And I think you can come to acceptance a lot faster, or at least in a smoother fashion than if you are fighting it and like, well, I just must be a bad person for feeling this way.
I don't think I've really thought about acceptance as more of like an umbrella way of thinking about grief, because a lot of times acceptance is framed as that I've made peace with this diagnosis. But really what I think acceptance truly is an acceptance and compassion for everything that I feel about it. Mm-hmm. The mad that I feel about it, the sad that I feel about it, the relief that I feel about it, the hopelessness, the yearning, the longing, and everything that comes with bereavement. Acceptance becomes a way of relating to all the different facets of what it means to be human, more than it does just like, I feel peaceful about this. Like, okay, job well done.
Yeah. Well, it's because it is interesting. I think I've had a conversation on social media, because that's how we interact with most of our community that way, for like research for episodes and things like that. And we've brought up the concept of acceptance of your child's, like, how long did it take you to accept this? And a lot of people were like, I never will. I haven't accepted it. It just is what it is. But I was like, I'm not convinced you haven't accepted it though. Cause to me, it's kind of more of what you were saying. It's like the way I see it is like, do you acknowledge this is your reality and you're being honest with yourself about it? And you're like, it is what it is. And to me, that's acceptance, which doesn't mean you're happy about it. It doesn't mean you're like, I'm so proud that my child's disabled, which I know there are parents who are saying that, and I think that's great for them. But I don't think you need to necessarily be like, I'm so glad this happened. I wouldn't take them any other way. My life is so wonderful because my child's disabled. I don't think it means you're necessarily excited about it, but I think it's just you can come to terms with it. Like you've processed it and you're like, yep, this is my life. And not necessarily, like going back to the therapy example, I think that can be where you can sort of see, how much someone has accepted their child's disability and how much they haven't. Because I think it can be easy to chase all the therapies and all the equipments and things like that to be like, but like, what if I find the thing that like cures it or changes it, or I can beat this, we can beat this. And I think that mentality, and some people find the therapy and it works really great and their child does really well with it. But I think that mentality can show a little bit of this inacceptance of reality. Whereas if you're able to say like, hey, like I'm prioritizing our quality of life and we're going to like take a step back and we're going to have some slower moments, that feels like acceptance to me. Even if you're not like, I love this. This is so great. Like just like seeing it for what it is, I think can be a huge step in that direction.
What are some of the other themes that you see from the podcast? So you talked about grief, deep sadness, and the weird component of embarrassment with that. What are some of the other themes that you see?
I would say it's very common for partners, for the parents to process things at different speeds and in different ways. That's definitely a theme. I think pretty much everyone could say that too. That's like kind of a universal thing of processing it differently. I think typically it's, the mom seems to go through a lot of the grief and the processing in a more like intense way, maybe more outwardly, or like where you can like really see it, right? Like, oh, she's crying all the time, or oh, she's, talking to her friends all the time about how hard this is, where the father tends to like withdraw and maybe check out a little bit and be disconnected. And then I won't say this is like the universal thing. This feels like it's like a very common theme of like then the mom being like, okay, I've kind of like come to terms with it. I've like, again, the acceptance of like, this is our life and I'm going to move forward with it, while the dad kind of stays back. Right. Cause I don't know. It's interesting to me how often it comes up with various topics where they're like, oh, well, I'm on board with this, or like I figured this out, but my husband still just hasn't really come to terms with it, or is kind of in denial that like we should get the wheelchair, or that, you know, these different things that are kind of, I don't want to say embracing the disability, but really like leaning into it and like, this is our life and we're moving forward with it. And so I've found that very interesting. And I think this gets to a broader topic of our society, the way that we treat men versus women with emotional things, and how allowed they feel to be able to process things. And I mean, we could get into like, that feels like a whole other topic, but I think, you know, there's a million reasons for this, but I think that can cause a lot of struggle between parents. If you're like, I'm over here and you're back here and I've already kind of processed this, but you're still kind of stewing in this, and we need to move forward and we need to do these things, but we're not on the same page because we're two humans processing this in a very different way.
My suspicion is that a big component to that is the mismatch in the amount of caregiving that is performed by the mother versus the father. So, you know, I've got this survey that I'm sifting through data on right now. And one of the things that has come up pretty frequently is the caregiving responsibilities skewing to the mother. And in some of the other data that I'm seeing as far as the financial impact on families who have medically complex, disabled or terminally ill children, is that a parent will quit working to stay home with their child. And most of the time that's going to be the mother. So it makes sense to me that, you know, some of the way that we process grief, process reality, and get to a point of acceptance is by being in it. You know, it's by really having to pay attention to what's happening and what's required to come alongside whatever's happening. And the primary caregiver is the one who is having to pay attention because their child's safety and security and all their needs are really dependent on that. And so there is this like split between the experience of the caregivers depending on who is more hands-on with the day-to-day stuff. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because I think if you're home with the child, you're taking them to the appointments, you're doing the therapies with them, like you can't ignore what's happening with your child. But if you can you go to work and you can interact with your colleagues and you're doing all these other things that are unrelated to your child, you can escape it, right? To a certain extent. And so that's a really good point. I think having it in your face all day, every day, I mean, how you have to process that. It's right there. So that's a really good point.
Even for the parent who is still working but is in charge of who is taking care of their child, there's a sense of still always being on, you know. And if there is a parent who's working and then the parent who becomes the primary caregiver and is home with them, there's also that disconnect for the person who's not there that doesn't have to worry as much about if their child's really being taken care of. Because I know that that's a really big problem for a lot of people who are trying to bring in additional help with their child. It's like finding someone who you can trust, who is going to still show up reliably, and who you also don't have to babysit while they're watching your child. You know, that's a big thing for sure for a lot of these parents.
Kind of that mental load, even when you're not explicitly taking care of them.
Yeah. That would be like, you know, when Annie was at school, it was almost felt like I always still had an ear turned toward the school, you know, waiting so just in case, like I was the one who was going to get called if something happened at school. And I remember the first time that she had a seizure at school, and like driving behind the ambulance to the elementary school, you know, like those experiences for the caregiver who's on and who happens to be, you know, the default person for that. You already said this at the beginning, but it's like all of the normal things that come with parenting are just amplified, you know, 10x, 20x, 100x when your child has additional needs, when their life is wrapped up a lot in the care that you give because of a lot of safety issues and concerns.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
So you said grief and deeps, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here. I should have like prepped you with like, what are some of the themes that you see? But maybe I'll just ask for one more. But you have the grief, the processing differently between parents. Do you have one more that comes to mind?
Yeah, I actually came up while you were sharing that story of working, but with your ear towards the school and like kind of like always being on. And I think that's exactly it. Like that is such a universal experience of being like, I'm never off. Like even while I'm sleeping, 'cause we did several episodes about sleep and exhaustion and kind of that burnout of like, I'm listening for them while I'm sleeping, knowing that I could wake up and they may not wake up, right? If I'm not there to intervene in an emergency. And so just that constant state of being on, even while you're trying to sleep, I think that is just such a crushing load. And it, I don't want to say that dads don't feel that, but probably, especially on the mom, and especially if she's the primary caregiver, but even if she's not, right? Like just kind of that extra hypervigilance that moms sometimes carry. I think it is just, it's staggering. And Kimball was about 2, 3, like he started like leveling out medically. He started stabling out medically, where like things were not as emergent and as sensitive as they were in the first few years of his life. And I just look at parents who are doing this on year 5, on year 10, on year 15, and I'm like, I honestly don't know how. I'm in awe. I'm like, I don't understand. I mean, I guess I would still be doing it if I had to. I would. But the resilience that parents need to build to be able to withstand that, and also not just the resilience, but also like, because I do believe that parents of medically complex children are the most resilient people in the world, but also the most burnt out, the most crushed, the most burdened. Like, I don't think it's like, I'm like super strong because I've been doing this for so long. I think it's a combination of like this grit of like, yes, you've persevered, but also who is this person that when I look in the mirror, they're unrecognizable, right? Like if you've just had to give and give and give and give in this really intense caregiving situation, I don't know. I think it's really sad. I think it's very sad. And I think that can also lead to a lot of like anger with systems that aren't there to support, and lack of maybe family support. Like the weight that these parents have to take on. I don't think anyone has a clue, unless they've lived through it, how much of a burden it can be. And not to take away from the child's worth. I think it's sensitive to talk about like a child as a burden, but I mean, it's a load. It's a load the whole family carries. The child carries it, right? They definitely are impacted by these disabilities and medical complexities and all the, the negative sides of that. But also the sibling gets, they carry that load too, and the parents are carrying it too. The whole family carries it. And so I think just that staggering, ongoing mental and emotional and physical load that these parents carry, it's incredible and staggering.
Yeah. I think what you just said about it's not about the child being a burden. It's more about how heavy things are when you're not well supported. Like the ability to deal with the grief and the sadness, the hypervigilance, the anticipatory grief, all of that is made more possible to bear when some of these like practical, very pragmatic things that life requires with a child with these extra needs, when those things are shored up, there's like more internal resources to be able to process some of the feelings that come with this. It's like, It kind of, I've thought about special needs parenting alongside Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like on this pyramid, which, there's a lot of thoughts about how that should be adjusted for inflation, like for like modern society. But basically, like on the bottom, you have the most basic needs that a human has. And as you go up the ladder, it's things that are, nice to have. And at the top, you have self-actualization. And I've thought about this like a lot in terms of how parents who have children whose lives are complex and who need the type of specialized attention that often you give to infants for like exactly what you were saying, like the sleep disruptions, the feeding schedules, like that, the diapering, that they don't ever age out of that necessarily. And so this period, this season of life that is so hard for new parents is extended for decades. And so if parents don't then also have additional support for that kind of bottom base needs that all humans have, there's less of an opportunity to be well resourced to be able to process some of these things. And that's why I think in the research, or the literature supports this, that women in particular are more at risk for autoimmune disease, for some of these like basically results of chronic stress that comes with long-term caregiving as a result of, not having adequate support for so many of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty wild how many health issues. We did an episode about that, and that blew my mind. I think I had a list of that people, I would write them down when people would share with me a health issue that they had faced since having their child, and that they were like, yep, it was as soon as we got this diagnosis that I started having all these, like this chronic pain or the arthritis or early menopause, like all these different symptoms. And I had a list of probably 30 or 40 things. I was like, this would be really interesting. I know there's been some research, but to make it like let's go official with this research and show like, because it's the things that you may expect, but then also things that are like someone, like she lost her vision for like, I think it was 2 weeks. She couldn't see anything right after a child had this emergency stay in a hospital. And she was like, I'm blind. Like I've gone blind. And they couldn't explain it. They were like, I have no idea why you just lost your vision. And then it came back and she was okay. And so just things like that, where I think our bodies are really taking the hit more than we realize. And probably like you're saying, when we're so focused on that bottom part of the pyramid, that we're like, we just can't handle these more cognitive things, like these emotions and these thoughts and really intense stuff that we need to process. I just can't. So I'm going to keep working on the survival mode. And I don't know. I think maybe that just takes a hit on our bodies when our brains are not able to process that stuff. I think it's a very fascinating and sad topic, but it's a huge reality for so many parents.
Yeah. This is probably a good place for us to end the episode. No, just kidding. I was gonna like, for people who are like, okay, great, I feel super seen. Now what? And I don't want to blow by the importance of being able to name the experience for so many people, because sometimes even just hearing someone else say, yes, your experience is valid and all of these things that you're feeling in your body, yeah, that you're not alone. You're not the only one. And the way that you've set up your podcast in order to empower people to be able to share their own experiences, that opens the door to relationships and recognizing, okay, like I'm not alone in this. Like I can do this. And but I would be remiss if we didn't then start to talk about not only what could be different systematically on a more community and governmental scale, but also in the individual space, like where's my autonomy lie? And you already talked about this a little bit in like the choice that you made to spend time out in your yard. But let's talk a little bit about what would be necessary systematically, or like ideal systematically, to be able to support parents in a way that they're really not. And then, so we could talk about the foster system, and then shift into the ability for us to make conscious, intentional choices on an individual level to change some of these dynamics in our own lives.
Yeah. So as we had chatted about before, off the grid, or off the, what do you call that? Off the off the record. We are starting the process. We're about halfway through the process of becoming, sorry, where I always say certified. It's not certified. It's basically certified as a foster home, a safe foster family for children to come into. And it's been super interesting to me because it's like there are so many like things that feel very related to having a child with a disability. I mean, as part of the supports, we have a 8-course training that's done online, but like with a live class. And as we've been going, I mean, just really quick, as one of the lessons, they were talking about all of the behavioral issues and things like that, and mental illnesses that they have as a result of all the trauma and abuse that they've experienced. And I was listening to this thinking, like, these are all disabled kids. Like, we've had this conversation about, will we or will we not tell them that we're willing to take in children who do have like legit disabilities and medical issues. There certainly is a need for that, and we do have skills and experience with that. So that's definitely probably in our future. But it's been interesting to be like, but they're all disabled, like not in the traditional way that Kimball is, but just in the sense that they have experienced things that cause delays, and they cause these issues where they're like, yeah, they may be an 8-year-old, but emotionally they may have they're emotionally a 3-year-old, or cognitively a 2-year-old, or these delays that happen because of abuse, neglect, and things like that. And so that's been super interesting, just to recognize like this feels very full circle just to our experiences in the disability community. But the way that this system, at least here in the state of Utah, is supported just blows my mind, because I'm like, where were supports like this when we had Kimball? Where was this? And I think you could argue even just in general parenting, like there should be courses, but I'm like, it blows my mind the way that we have been so educated in these courses. And then just learning about all the ways that we'll be support, like even right now, actually, we have these monthly events that we are going to with other families that are in what we call pre-service, when you're being trained and you haven't been placed yet with any foster children. So we've been placed into these groups, and you better believe I got someone's number as soon as we went in there. I was like, I'm finding my community, and I'm finding them now, because I understand what it's like to go through this type of thing without that, because that's how we did Kimball's life for the first few years before starting the Rare Life. And that made it even more of a hell than it needed to be. And so I'm like very proactively like, let's get their number. We're having them over for treats. We're finding our community, we're finding our people, but the system is set up so well to support that, because they're putting us in these groups with other families before we've even been placed. And then, and being educated, where we found out about Kimball's disabilities when I was pregnant with him. I was 20 weeks. And of course there was nothing at all. I mean, we went to the doctors and they were, oh, we think it's this diagnosis, and so here's the medical care he'll receive. And we think this and we think that, but it was just like, what is happening with his body? How do we keep him alive? Which is certainly necessary, but there was zero education on the purpose of the NICU and what it's going to be like to go to the NICU. I mean, we knew he was going to be there, but we had no idea what it was going to be like. We weren't trained on any of the acronyms or the verbiage, there just was nothing like that. And so to be so trained, in preparation for receiving these children, is wild. And then just when they've been teaching us about the resources we will have once we are placed with these children, we will have access to what they call respite care, which is other families who have also been certified foster homes. They can't be cared by anyone else unless they've been gone through that training process. And so they're like, anytime that you need, a weekend, if you're going to grandma's, if you just need a break, you can count on these other families that they will take in your children. You can drop them off and you're good to go. So that, even that right there, I'm like, we need some kind of respite system with having medically complex children, because that's a huge need. And certainly leads to increased burnout. And then, we also have just like these sheds that they fill full of donated supplies. They have car seats, they have cribs, they have clothing from like all the different sizes you could possibly need. They have these grants to help the children like be able to participate in different activities. And they have, again, these family events, but this time for when you've been placed and you're actively fostering. And so you have that access to community. You have a therapist that you're matched with that you can meet with anytime when you need to talk to someone. Because, obviously that's needed. Again, that would be amazing if you had this therapist that you just plugged into that is specifically trained for parents who are dealing with having foster children and everything that comes with that. The list kind of just goes on and on of all the things Here's this other one this is crazy to me. I'm like, if we had something like this for disability parenting, what did they call them? Your care team? I think it's called your care team. I just learned about this. They match you with 12 families in your community, geographically close. And they encourage you to submit names of people that you know already that could possibly be on this team. And that team is in charge of helping take the child to appointments and to bring you a meal, to help clean up your house, like all of these practical concerns that you would have. The foster care system sets up they train these 12 families to be your people, like your team. They call them your care team. I think this is actually, I don't know that this happens anywhere else. I think this is a unique thing in Utah, but it just blows my mind the amount of support that's just built in. Like, we didn't have to go seek this out. We didn't have to go like, oh, let me go see if I can build this podcast to try to find other families who are dealing with this. It's all there, systematically built in. And so we just have started this process. I am so curious as this goes on to find more and more things like that I'm like, why is this not a thing when you have a child with these intense disabilities or medical complexities? Where is this system? Why is it not in place? And it'd be really cool if somehow that could be.
That's a good question. Why isn't this in place? What are your suspicions?
I mean, I think it's with the foster care system, you are taking these children that you have zero responsibility for, right? Like, we are like opening our home to these children that I don't have any relation to. I'm just doing it to help. And so I think that mentality definitely lends itself to that, where they see these children as they need a community to step in and, create a safe place for them until their parents are able to take them back. So I think there is this responsibility the government feels over these children more so than they feel over our children. But I don't know that it needs to be that way. I'm like, disability happens to everyone. These supports are there ultimately to create a safe space for these children that are disadvantaged. And I'm like, so why aren't we creating these safe spaces by supporting the parents, right? Just the way the foster care system does. Why aren't we supporting these families, these parents, in the way they need in order to protect these children and help them, have the life that they deserve too and the safety they deserve? So I think, it's probably just a perspective of like, what do we own? Like, what are we responsible for? And there's not that same ownership that they feel.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Holy smokes. I wrote all the notes down of what you said that the system is providing for you. It pretty much is hitting on all of the kind of like the most important levers when it comes to the types of things that parents in the disability community need. So, some of it is the education piece, like what is your child's diagnosis? What does that mean for their body and brain? What does that mean for future needs? Some of it is, like a real intellectual process, but I think a big piece of it is who's coming alongside you to be in this space with you. And I think the daily, really practical things are really underestimated in their importance. So something like having someone help clean the home or provide meals for the family, like those things really matter. And I think it's really important for people who are like, I want to help, but I don't know how. I'm not really sure what to say or what to do, to hear how easy it can be to show someone that you support them by just showing up and folding laundry with them, or sitting with their child so you can take a shower, or, coming in and being alongside you as you weed your garden. These are all things that are seemingly small gestures, but actually make a huge impact.
Yeah. Well, it's the infrastructure of a village, right? Where we talk like, oh, it takes a village. Where's my village? Which again, like that's a theme that's true for all parenting, but especially with this type of intense parenting, whether that's foster parenting or disability parenting, where you need a village, right? You cannot do it without a village. And so we're just kind of left to like figure out how to build that village and how to ask people for help. But in the foster care system here, like, they've made the infrastructure. They've thought this through, and I'm sure there's been a lot of advocacy, and I'm very grateful for everyone who's like made this a dream. But these supports are just there, and there are people who are employed to make sure that they happen. One other thing, or two other things that I forgot to mention too, is that they have an arm of it, of the Utah foster care is just based on retention. And so they were like, our job is to make sure you can keep doing this. Like anything you need, anytime you need to like do any kind of like problem solving, we're here, we will get you what you need. And so can you imagine if you had someone like that? If you had a person that you could go to about having a disabled child, where you could be like, and it's not just the medical person, it's like the life of this family. Like, you're right, it could be anything that is related to like keeping this family afloat. I'm there for you to come problem solve and talk to. And here's another thing I forgot. You were also going to be paired with a mentor of another foster family. I'm like, why are these things not in place? Like, can you imagine if you were paired up with a mentor family that was maybe a few years ahead? It wouldn't have to be the same diagnosis, because really, like, that's what you go to these medical appointments for, is like the specifics of the diagnosis. Many of us have very rare disease that our children have, but like, just to be paired up with a parent who's like, yeah, I've been doing this life. My child is like several, years in the future, or it could be a teenager, whatever. I've lived this before. It gets better. Make sure you're doing X, Y, Z. I learned that later on the hard way, or even just being able to ask questions of like, is this normal? I feel horrible. I feel like I don't even know what's happening. Like, oh, that's called grief. Like, you're experiencing grief right now. Even though your child's alive, you are grieving. Just all of these things. I don't know. It could be so much better.
Yeah. I think you're touching on something really important. That is this idea of seeing someone who's a little bit ahead of you and being like, are you okay? Because what we want to know is, am I going to be okay? And that's not something that is easily Googleable. I could find out all sorts of things about Annie's disease, but am I going to be able to do this? Is really what I wanted to know. And to be able to talk to a mother. I remember in the really early days after Annie's diagnosis, she was 3, and there was a mom who had an older teenager who wrote me this really long email about, the things that they had done with their son's diet and the medications that they have tried that are, outside of the box a little bit, and how it helped with these things. And the fact that she took the time really to just pour out all of this knowledge to a complete stranger made me feel like, oh my goodness, like, okay, not only am I not by myself, but there's this woman ahead of me who is a wealth of information and knowledge, not only about this diagnosis, but about how to take care of herself long term. And so having someone who's able to tell you, like, yeah, these are the pitfalls and this is how we navigated it, and the person that I am on the other side of all of the things that are really scary and that you might be really terrified about, like, the person on the other side of that is going to be more compassionate, more open, more of an advocate than you'll even be able to realize right now. And that's something else that I've found to be so inspiring by my survey results, and also through the literature, is that parents in this community are a wealth of experience and information about what it means to really embrace life to the fullest. And so many parents get into nonprofit work or advocacy or like changing legislation because of their children. And I think that that's a really untapped wealth of information and experience about what it means to live fully, and what it means to alchemize the heartache into something that serves people on a broader scale.
Yeah. Well, because I think it has to mean, like, that's like with the meaning making, it's like it has to mean something. And I don't know that everyone gets to that point. I mean, again, going back to that survival mode, if you are purely trying to survive and help your child survive, you can't get to that point, which again is like points to the importance of supports. And maybe you could, I don't want to say can't, but it's certainly going to be a lot harder, and it's not going to be on your mind as high as like, how do I get through this? But I think it's like, if you've been through something that has caused so much pain for you, so much for your child, for your family, if you're able to find something that gives it some kind of meaning, and not necessarily, we went through this so I could help others. I don't by that. That doesn't feel true to me. Like, why would we suffer just so I could help other people who are also suffering so they can help other, it just doesn't make sense to me. But I'm like, this crappy thing happened, and now I can help other people from that. And that helps it not just be like, we just suffered and that was it. And then we stopped suffering because things got better. But like, we suffered, and that sucks. And I hate that we all suffered, but also look at this beautiful thing that came from it. And I think also not discounting, if you're not like, oh, I'm not making a podcast. I'm not making a nonprofit. I'm not like doing like legislate all those things you said. I think some people do, but also just recognizing the value of, yeah, but I'm a way better person than I used to be.
Yes.
Like, I may not be doing all these things, but I'm a better human.
Yes.
I think, and cause, it's those humans that are behind all these things, right? Like, I think we all are changed for the better at some point. It may take years and years and years before you're like, yeah, I do like myself better than I used to be. But at some point, I think most of us get to that point. And I think whether or not you're doing anything that's like big and grand and visible, the fact that you're changing, I think, is so valuable. And that can be the meaning as well, if it's not something as visible.
Yeah, that's a really, really lovely point to make alongside the more visible, big ways.
Which
that
those are
people
cool
express.
too. I mean, the stuff that parents have done. I mean, I love seeing all the things that parents have channeled because of our experiences. So don't get me wrong; those thrill me. But I also don't want people to be like, "What's wrong with me? I'm not, making this big grand thing out of it."
Yeah, the way that we're changed in the way that we love our children is enough.
Yeah.
And that's really beautiful. I wanted to ask, why did you start the podcast? Like, what were you looking for that wasn't available, and how has the podcast changed, and also how have you changed as a result of doing the podcast?
So I would say I can like kind of pin it down to two different experiences I had that were like, oh, this is what I should do. The first was, and it happened around the same time actually. The first was going to therapy for the first time. And it's so funny because I wasn't sleeping. I was sleeping like 3 hours a night. And it wasn't because Kimball was needing care during the night. Like, he needed a little bit, but I was just laying there, just full of anxiety and grief and all. I mean, just a jumble of emotions. And I was like, oh, I've read that insomnia is a symptom of not having processed grief like you need to. It's like stuck grief. Like, that's interesting. It's because I haven't processed my dad who died a couple years ago. So I went to therapy to like work through my dad's death. And I remember this there. I mean, it was such a funny thing where I was just like, Google searched the closest therapy clinic and asked them for the next available therapist. It was not thought through at all. And I got paired with like the best therapist ever, who I've recommended to all these people who like just are obsessed with her. So shout out to Rosie. That felt like really cool chances. But anyway, when I met with her, I was like, oh yeah, I think I'm here because of my dad. So I told her a little bit about that. And she was like, you seem like you're at a really healthy place with that. She's like, tell me more about your son. So I was like, oh yeah, let's talk about my son. So anyway, it's kind of funny how I didn't even recognize that I should have therapy about what I was going through with Kimball, which again points to like, we should probably be just putting people into therapy as soon as these things happen. But anyway, so I did end up working through all the trauma with Kimball, and we did EMDR therapy, which I highly recommend. It was life-changing for me. I mean, that we did it it was only like a 6 to 8 week thing, because it's supposed to be something that like you work through and you have these sessions, and then you're kind of, it's not like talk therapy where it's kind of indefinite. And I just remember being like, I feel okay. Like I feel like myself again. Like, finally I'm back. And I think Kimball was a year old at this point. But this whole thing started when I was pregnant with him. So it'd been about a year and a half of just being in this fog of like, I don't even know myself anymore. And I was like, I feel again, like I feel stable. I feel happy. I feel like I can do stuff now, where before it was such survival mode. And so that really planted in me, like, I want this for other people. I want this feeling for other parents. And things didn't change with him at that point. I mean, it was still, we were very much in the thick of things. But just that difference I felt internally made such a big difference. I mean, it really felt like waking up for the first time in that year and a half. And then this other experience I had I had a friend who was pregnant at the same time as me. And with, when I was pregnant with Kimball, and her son passed away right before birth. And it was just, of course, so tragic. And her husband started a podcast. And I listened to the first episode, and it was based around having children that were stillborn or died in infancy. And I was like, oh, I'll support her. I want to listen to this first episode. And it was just this mom. They just tell their stories. They just talk about their child and what happened and how it feels. And so I listened to this, and I was like, whoa, I feel so seen right now. And Kimball did not pass away, right? He wasn't stillborn. He didn't die as an infant. But just hearing her talk about what it was like to find out from the doctors that something was wrong with their baby, and being so crushed, and the grief they were experiencing, and then the uncertainty and the roller coaster, I was like, our experiences aren't the same. Like, we are in two different groups, and yet I've never felt like this before, to finally find someone who can, again, not perfectly relate, but I heard parts of my story and her story, and it was just so shocking. It was such a shocking feeling, because up to that point, I didn't know how to find community. I didn't talk to anyone who could understand. I didn't know anyone who knew what I was going through. I was just I felt like the freak show among my friends of that looks really hard. Wow, I don't know how you do it. And we're just bouncing our normal babies. And I'm just like, wow, this is so hard. So it was so cool to be able to be that's what that feels like, to feel understood, and not only understood, but understood in a world where it feels like very few people do understand. So the idea danced through my head, and I think I even vocalized it to my husband. I was like, I want a podcast for us. Where's the podcast for us? And I was like, I guess I could just make one. And then that kind of sat in my head for the next year and a half. And those two thoughts combined to be I want to also highlight stories, but from people who have children who are medically complex and disabled. And so the story part of it, where you feel seen and you feel known and you have that community, but also the way that I processed through his trauma with therapy was by talking about the most pain, literally finding, hey, what's the most painful memory that you have in connection to this? And then digging into that and talking about it. So it felt like scrubbing out a ooey gooey wound that's infected and disgusting, and scrubbing it out. So incredibly painful, but then finding the healing that happened after I was able to scrub it out and process it. And so that's kind of what I wanted from this, was those two aspects of we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the really hard stuff, and we're not shying away. We're going to dig into that to help kind of process it vicariously by listening to someone else talk about something that is similar to what you have experienced, to be able to process through that trauma, kind of like therapy. But then also just the feeling of oh, I found someone who understands. And it's been really cool to see that I was right about that was a need. And it's been cool too, because there's been a lot more, I started it 6 years ago, and there's been a lot more activity with spaces like this now, but I couldn't find anything like this when we first started it. And so, yeah, that's been a really neat thing to be yep, I wasn't the only one who craved something like this.
How has the podcast changed you?
I mean, I felt like I processed everything. Now I can help others. As I interviewed people, I was like, I haven't processed everything yet. so I've definitely done a lot more processing, and that's been really, really cool to be on the the front seat of all that, of being able to talk to families and parents, and just really be, I don't know, just it's so solidified in my mind that I'm never alone, right? So whether it's with disability parenting, look at this huge, robust community, not just the Rare Life community, but of course outside of that, of so many parents and families who understand every emotion that I could possibly have has been felt before, and it's being felt by other people. I'm not so unique. Every version has been felt. But also, as we're facing this, this new and scary world of foster care, of being I didn't know anyone. Well, I vaguely knew people tangentially who had done foster care, but not anyone close to me. And so that has not fazed me. I'm like, there is a huge community of parents who are fostering, and I will go find them, and I'm already finding them because, again, the infrastructure is like way easier to do that than it was for disability parenting. And so I think just that knowledge of like, no matter what I go through, I'm not alone. Like there are always people to be gathered or to be found that have experienced what I'm experiencing. And that just, I think if I'd had that when I was first experiencing everything with Kimball, it would have still been very hard, of course, but so different. I think it would have been so different. And so I think that knowledge is just deep within me of just this lack of loneliness, of this like robust, like there are always people who will understand what I'm going through.
That's beautiful. Well, as we wrap up our time with each other, is there anything else that comes to mind that you would like to share? Any kind of parting thoughts or words of wisdom that will fix the world? Preferably, that would be great if you could do
Oh
that.
man, that's a lot of pressure. The parting thoughts. I don't know. I think humans are really, really cool. And I think that kind of goes back to the whole, like, there are always people who've experienced this, but I think like just not underestimating the power of finding those people and knowing that like, for the most part, they're going to want to support you. And especially if they've been through what you are going through, I think a lot of the kind of resentment and bitterness of like, the world sucks comes from like, you know, maybe the well-intended mother-in-law who says things that are super offensive, or the neighbor who didn't show up for you. But those are usually people who have they have no idea what you're going through. They don't know what it's like. And there are people who can support you even if they don't know. But I think the issue comes when they have not experienced it. And so I think tapping into the amazing humans who do have some experience can just better support you. And so, yeah, I wouldn't underestimate how most humans want to help each other. And again, especially if they've been there, if they know the pain that you're going through, they're going to want to help you. And so to not feel any kind of shame or hesitation in reaching out and building your community.
That's beautiful. Oh man. Well, for everyone that's listening, I will put links to everything in the episode notes so you can listen to Madeline's podcast, The Rare Life, and you can learn more about her work. Tell us about the new thing that you either just have launched or are launching soon for parents in the NICU.
Oh yeah. So we are, I mean, it's all made. We just need to print and distribute these NICU survival guides. And it's a 6-page booklet. So it's a physical thing, which is kind of outside of what we've done before, where we've always been very digital, but it's just to be passed out in NICUs. And it's a little bit of an attempt at what should have been there. Of like, here's some advice of like just surviving the NICU. I mean, you have all these doctors that are in charge of keeping your baby alive, and we're grateful for them, but also what about you as you're navigating it? And so just a lot of practical advice, things that you can consider packing when you go to the NICU, who's who in the NICU, all the things. And so I'm really excited for us to start distributing that into NICUs because, again, I think it fills a very needed gap that, you know, probably should be filled by like bigger players, but we will do our best to fill some of that gap, you know, the best we can, since that's not really there. So
is there something else that's coming up that I don't know about or that I didn't mention? Because
I look like us.
Well, you seem surprised when I pointed to the NICU thing. I was like, oh, it seems like there's something else that she had that she thought I was
there's another
talking
thing
about.
too. There is.
Oh, tell me.
So in the fall is when we're projecting to start this kind of sister podcast called Life After the Rare Life. And so that is for people like you, where after you've lost a child, because unfortunately that's very common in our community, right? A lot of us are losing our children to their various medical complexities and diseases and things. And so I was at a funeral for one of our very loyal listeners and community members. And it was our first time meeting in person, and we had a big hug and stuff. And she was like, I want to stay involved, but I'm not sure how, but I want to stay involved. I can't let go of this community. And I was thinking, like, where do these people go? Because it's kind of this running dark joke with me and my producer where we're like, how many podcast episodes have we canceled because their child passed away before we recorded? It's just, you have to laugh so you don't cry. I mean, we've cried too, but it is so harrowing to be like, these children are passing away before we can even interview the parents. And these are incredible parents that we want to talk to. And we've done episodes still, like, you know, after their child has passed away, but we were like, we need a space just for this. Sometimes it can be, you know, it can be hard for a person whose child has passed away to go listen to episodes about a living child, and vice versa. It can be hard if you know your child's going to pass away, or they probably will, and you're listening to an episode about what it's like after that life. You don't necessarily want to hear that yet. And so I think having separate spaces, kind of a safe landing spot for parents who kind of graduate out of the rare life, feels really important to me. So that'll be something that we're also working on. That should happen this fall.
Exciting. You have taken care of this community so tenderly and intentionally. It's a really, really beautiful thing to witness and now be a part of. So thank you for your work. And again, for all the listeners, everything's going to be in the episode notes, so you can find episodes that resonate with you, that you can feel seen and less alone in your own journeys. And before we go, as usual, P.S. we expire.